We're gonna have them stick around because I'm just gonna give you a couple quick points. This morning I woke up and I'm just like, the message is on prayer, and as I'm praying through like what we're gonna talk about, it's like, well, you could talk about prayer, or we can actually do the thing that we're talking about. So I'm just gonna give you a couple quick insights on prayer. Hey, thank you guys, appreciate you guys. And we're gonna be in Exodus chapter 32. Talking about the prayer of the righteous. And by the way, thank you, Rick. I know you're listening from the other room, doing the offering count, but thank you for that. I'm going to just leave it right there. I'm not going to touch it for the rest of this morning. And but thank you for your family calling. And I want to thank whoever it was that's been praying for me this week, because I know that you were, and I felt it, and I can tell you that your prayers have worked. So whoever that was, probably more than one of you, thank you. And by the way, don't stop, because we all need it, and I definitely can feel that too. When we talk about prayer, a lot of times, we were talking about the vending machine idea last week. You know, a lot of times when we talk about prayer, it can be easy for us, especially when we're trying to teach about it, to say, okay, let me give you like some steps. Like if you follow these steps, here's how you pray, and here's how to get God to answer your prayer. But what I want to share today is prayer is not so much about how and what, but it's about who. Does that make sense? It's not about like, okay, what steps do I got to take? What words do I got to say? It's about knowing the person that you're praying to. If you're married, how many of you have been married for more than like 30 years? All right, quite a few of you. Not me just yet. I hope that after 30 years, you've learned how to talk to your spouse. If you don't, please come see me right after service. We will work that out. But after 30 years, my hope is the way that it's designed is for something to happen that you learn, okay, I said this, and she didn't like that, so I'm not going to say this anymore. Now, some of you will do that just because you know it pushes the other person's buttons, and you kind of save that, like, all right, if she makes me mad, I'm going to use this, so don't do that. But over time, you learn the other person's preferences. You learn what they like. You learn their favorite foods. You learn how to cook them. You learn how they like to be talked to. You learn the kind of gifts they prefer. When we pray, it's not so much about getting God to do something we want. It's about understanding who God is. And as we understand who God is, then we pray and we ask him for things that are already in his heart for him to give us. I want to share just a quick message from Exodus 32. And this is the golden calf. Many of you know this story. I'm going to sum it up. We'll skip to verse 11, if you guys could. Thank you for those who are in the back working so hard to make sure. Quick version of the story. Moses goes up the mountain to get the 10 commandments. And they're basically saying, this is going to be our covenant. This is who we're going to be. We're God's people. And this is going to be how we're doing these things. While Moses is up on the mountain talking to God, in this chapter, do you know what the people are at the bottom of the mountain doing? They're making a golden calf and saying, okay, this is going to be our God because Moses is taking too long. We need somebody to worship. And so while God is like basically saying, here's how we're going to put a ring on it, they're basically cheating on him. It's crazy. Like, why would you? And it doesn't make sense to me. You just walked through the Red Sea miraculously, and now you're just worshiping something other than God. Like, how could you see God move and then just go ahead and worship something other than God? And then I was like, oh, actually, I've done that before. So this is where they are. They're worshiping the golden calf. And so God knows that it's happening, and God is angry. Now, one little note about anger. Anger is usually a secondary emotion. You know what the primary emotion usually is? Hurt. Yes, I heard somebody say it. So God is hurt. God is heartbroken. I just saved these people from slavery, and now they're acting like it was somebody else that did it. And God is hurt. God is angry, and God is telling Moses, Moses, get out of the way. I'm going to wipe them all out, every single one of them. I'm keeping you. The rest of them, they're going to burn. Watch what Moses says. But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heavens. And all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever." And verse 14, and the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. If you were here last week, you remember we talked about this verb. God relented. God repented in some translations. God was moved just as a parent is moved with compassion for his children. Now, this passage sometimes messes people up because it's just like, wait, are you saying that God changes his mind? And then it spirals into this debate about like whether God can change his mind or not. But if we get caught up in these debates, we miss something very, very crucial. God is a relational God. Remember that from last time. God's relational. And guess what? What Moses was doing is the textbook definition of interceding. Many of you do this powerfully. You go between, like Moses is doing. He's standing between God and the people. The God that created the heavens and earth and can just like with one word wipe them all out. And he's actually standing in between God and the people that he's saying he's going to do that to. And say, God, don't, please don't. God's looking for people to do the same thing. To stand between God and people and say, God, this is what they need. Can you please interact on their behalf for their good? I know they may have earned your punishment, but God, I want to appeal to another part of your character. And instead of debating whether God already made up his mind or whether God changed his mind, let's focus on this. God's looking for people who will talk to him in this way. God's looking for those who are close enough to him to get to know him well enough to know what's already in his heart and to say, okay, I'm going to appeal to what I know is in your heart, and I'm going to ask you for that because I know what's important to you and I know what your plans and your will is because I know you. So a couple quick points I just want to make. Moses appealed to God's compassion. Moses appealed to God's compassion. Same thing that Amos did last week. Like, God, they're not going to be able to withstand it. That's going to hurt. That's going to be a problem. They will wipe them out, God. It will break their hearts. Please don't do it. And God listened. My question for you is, are you willing to appeal to God's compassion? Maybe it's for someone in your life. Maybe it's for somebody that just gets on your nerves. Can you appeal like Moses did to God's compassion? We talked a couple weeks ago about praying for our city. Can we appeal to God's compassion? Do you believe that God has compassion for the people in Ravenna? There is brokenness in this city. I haven't seen all of it and all to the depths of it, but I know that there are things that happen in the city that breaks God's hearts. There are people who are lost that need him. Can we appeal that God would have compassion and do something? You want to know a crazy thing that happens when you appeal to God's compassion? You appeal to God's compassion, and then you start to feel God's compassion. And then something crazy happens. The very thing you're praying for God to do, it's like, I'll be willing to do that if you want me to. And God moves compassionately through us. Appeal to God's compassion. The next thing Moses did, Moses appealed to God's promises. He said, remember what he was saying to God. He's like, God, you promised. You told Abraham you were going to make a great nation. If you do this, it seems to me to be in violation of your promise. So, God, I'm appealing to a promise that you already made because that's your promise. You have to keep your promises, God. How many of you can name a promise that God has given? Come on, just give me a couple. Just shout out one of God's promises. Go ahead. Just shout them out. Yes. Okay, good. Another one. Give me another promise. He will return. Yes. What was that one? That your brother will be saved. He was saved. So he promised you and he fulfilled that promise. Oh, okay, good, good. This is good because some of you are saying like general promises, like you read in the Word of God, it's like, okay, I see these promises, and you appeal to those promises. Some of you have prayed and you've gotten a specific promise, and you sense that God was telling you he's going to do this. Appeal to his promises. Pray God's promises to him. One of the most powerful things you can do, if you've ever been in a situation where you just don't know how or what to pray, open to the book of Psalms and just start reading it as if you're talking to him. Pray God's promises. You might be in a situation where you're just feeling lonely. Okay, God, I feel like you've left me, but your promise says I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to abandon you. God, you promised this. Can you let me experience that, please? Some of you, we just talked about guilt. God, you promised your forgiveness. I'm not feeling forgiven. I'm going to appeal to your promise that it is finished, that my sin is buried. God, I'm struggling financially. I don't know how I'm going to pay this bill, but in your word, you said that if we trust you, that just as the birds don't have to worry, I'm going to be able to have everything that I need. So I'm going to ask you for your promise to be fulfilled. Pray God's promises to him. It's not that you're reminding him of his promises, because guess what? He already knows what he said. But you know what that does? Just like with the compassion thing, you pray God's promises, you know what it does for me? It reminds me, like, he did promise that. Now I have a decision. Am I going to trust him for what he said? And am I going to have that kind of faith that even though I can't see it, that I know he's going to come through? Appeal to God's promises. The last thing Moses did was Moses appealed to God's character. This was an appeal to God's reputation. If you heard one of the first verses that he says, he talks about what are the Egyptians going to say when they find out that you couldn't save your people from your own destruction. Your reputation among the nations is at stake. Moses appeals to that reputation, to that character. And God takes him seriously. When Jesus says, when you ask things in my name, you know what he's saying? He's saying you ask based on things that would advance the reputation of God. Appeal to God's character. God, you are a God of love. You are a God of power. You are the healer. So guess what? I'm going to ask you to do those things that are in line with who you said you are. Those are things that I want to challenge us to pray for. And actually, I got one more. And this is one we're going to talk a little more about next week. But Moses appealed to his position in relationship to God. I'm going to save most of this for next week, but here's a little sneak preview. Moses used the words, if I have found favor in your eyes. There's another verse we'll read next week, Exodus 33. He starts his prayer to ask God to do something by the words, if I found favor in your eyes. And I want to ask you something. Have you found favor in God's eyes? When you look at what Jesus did on the cross, you might not think you've earned that favor. You might not think you've done enough to be able to approach God and ask him for anything. Well, you want to know something? If you put your faith in Jesus' work on the cross, that when he said it is done, you have found favor. You've been given his favor. And the word says you can approach his throne with confidence. You can walk up to the throne of God and say, God, I need to ask you for something. And he allows you that access. Because By the way, Moses was certainly not deserving of the call that God placed on his life. But God drew him close to him, talked to him as a friend. You found favor in God's eyes. Keep talking to him. Appeal to that which is true about him and about your position in him. And what's going to happen is this, is even in those prayers that you pray, you don't see the answer coming, what's going to happen is, okay, obviously it's not lining up with how I saw it's going to be. So I need to get to know you more so I can understand what's happening. And even if I don't get the answer to the prayer, like we said before, if I can get closer to you, that's worth everything. So today we're going to close in prayer. Let's stand together. If you guys could put the pad on A, we're gonna go into that. And I know you guys, I've already put you to work today, but I'm gonna have the prayer team come up one more time. And if you guys could just be available. And in these next few moments, what I want you to do is I want you to pray. I want you to appeal to God's compassion. Especially those of you who have somebody in your life that's lost. You have people that you work with, you have family members that are lost and they just don't know the Lord. And especially if they're making decisions that just don't glorify God. Appeal to his compassion. God, I believe that you have compassion on this lost person. Do you believe that? Then appeal to God's compassion. Appeal to God's promises. If you're struggling financially, if you're struggling with peace, understand that he's made promises directly related in his word to these specific areas. Appeal to those promises. Appeal to God's very character himself. You need a father. You need love. You need to see his power. Those are all aspects of his character. Appeal to his character. Let's just take a few minutes, worship together. For whatever it is that you need prayer for, ask and believe that it's going to be given to you. And if it doesn't happen today, believe that the process by which he answers your prayer is also going to draw you closer to him so that you know him even more than you do right now. God, we appeal to you today. We appeal to who you are. We believe in you. God, let our faith rise up this morning.